Welcome to History Empire Center. Today we're stepping back in time to one of the most iconic and controversial battles in American history, the Battle of the Little Bighorn, also known as the Battle of the Greasy Grass. This historic clash unfolded on June 25, 1876, amidst the rugged terrain of southeastern Montana, where the U.S. Army's 7th Cavalry, led by Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer, faced off against a united force of Lakota Sioux, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors. As we begin our journey at Last Stand Hill, the very site where Custer and his men made their fateful stand, we'll retrace the steps of this pivotal event, from the deep ravines known as coulees to the winding Little Bighorn River that gives this battlefield its name. We'll explore how this vast landscape shaped the course of the battle. But what was it all about? To understand, we must venture beyond this battlefield to the Black Hills, a sacred land to the Sioux but rich in gold. The discovery of gold ignited tensions between Native Americans defending their homeland and settlers driven by greed and expansion. This battle wasn't just a fight for survival, it symbolized centuries of Native resistance against encroachment on their way of life. Join us as we uncover the stories etched into this land. Stories of bravery, tragedy, and a turning point in the struggle for America's western frontier. The Treaty of Laramie designates the Black Hills, revered as sacred by the Sioux, as their permanent territory. In 1874, the U.S. government dispatched an expedition into these hills, known as the Black Hills Expedition, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer. The mission aimed to identify a suitable site for a military fort and to investigate the potential presence of gold in the region. Gold was indeed discovered, and the news quickly made headlines, attracting a surge of miners and prospectors eager to partake in the gold rush. Despite the government's obligation to protect the Sioux sacred land, their efforts to prevent the influx of settlers were lackluster. Consequently, the Sioux found themselves compelled to take up arms as their sacred territory was encroached upon. Attempts were made to negotiate the purchase of the Black Hills, but ultimately the Sioux were forcibly removed and relegated to their reservations. As an outsider and not a citizen of the United States, I have always held a deep admiration for Native Americans, particularly for their skills in archery. Allow me to present this intriguing item, a replica arrowhead crafted from a spoon. The neck of the spoon has been flattened and sharpened, allowing it to be fitted onto an arrow. The Sioux on the reservations were provided with utensils such as spoons, knives, and forks, which they ingeniously repurposed. However, many Sioux, along with some Cheyenne, resisted the constraints of reservation life and sought to return to their traditional hunting grounds. Sitting Bull, one of my childhood heroes, originally named Buffalo Sitting Down, cautioned against interaction with white settlers, asserting, "Keep away from the white man. I have nothing to do with him. Let us return to the hunting areas. They will not be able to reach us," and indeed he achieved success. He was present. There is gold in those hills. The U.S. government opposes what they refer to as hostiles who have left the reservations. They plan to dispatch an expedition to forcibly return these hostiles to the reservations. These reservations were managed by government officials known as Indian agents, some of whom were corrupt. Ironically, these agents frequently engaged in trade with the hostiles, specifically Sioux warriors who resided outside the reservations. These warriors would return to the reservations to conduct trade, exchanging furs and skins for coffee, sugar, and most critically, firearms and ammunition. They also traded with enterprising white merchants, acquiring repeating rifles and revolvers. The Indian agents were tasked with distributing rations, including food, coffee, and tea, to the Native Americans living on the reservations. However, these rations were often delayed, of poor quality, and insufficient in quantity, leading to famine among the reservation populations. Consequently, many Native Americans were starving on the reservations, while Sioux and Cheyenne tribes thrived in the hunting grounds, where buffalo and antelope were abundant. As a result, individuals began to leave the reservations to seek out Sitting Bull and other esteemed medicine men and chiefs. The reservation system was failing. In response, the U.S. government decided to deploy the military to compel the Sioux and Cheyenne back onto the reservations. It is important to note the numerous bands of Native Americans that rallied around Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, including the Hunkpapa Sioux, smaller groups such as the Yanktonai, Santee, and Gull, as well as larger factions like the Oglala Sioux, Crazy Horse's followers, Red Cloud's people, the Brule, Blackfoot, Two Kettles, and Miniconjou, along with the Sanzar, Arapaho, and Northern Cheyenne. These groups were coming together in significant numbers. Ultimately, there were 5,000 individuals who could dismantle their camp overnight and relocate. They were well organized and resolute, unwilling to return to the reservation and face starvation. Can one blame them for their actions? They acquired rifles, repeating pistols, and some even possessed muzzle-loading rifles, bows and arrows, clubs, coop sticks, and lances. Additionally, they had a substantial herd of ponies that could graze on ample grass as they moved. Their situation was relatively stable until the arrival of the U.S. cavalry. From the perspective of the U.S. forces, they dispatched a contingent of troops, including General Crook, Colonel Gibbon, and General Terry. Their objective was to advance and intercept this large Indian camp. The strategy involved driving off the ponies and launching an attack on the camp. By capturing the camp, which included civilians, excluding women, children, and the elderly, they aimed to compel the warriors to surrender, as they would lose their mobility. However, on June 17th, General Crook encountered resistance at the Rosebud River and was defeated, forcing him to withdraw with his troops. This left Colonel Gibbon and General Terry to proceed. They planned to approach from the north of Little Bighorn, where they believed the large camp to be located. General Terry authorized Colonel Custer and his 7th Cavalry to scout ahead. Upon reviewing his orders, it was clear that he was instructed to scout and report back. We find ourselves at the onset, yet simultaneously at the conclusion of the conflict. If you gaze into the distance, particularly towards those hills, it was from the summit of Crow's Nest, one of the prominent hills, where Custer's scouts first detected the presence of a Native American encampment. The Sioux and Cheyenne are gathered here, but they are not prepared for the fact that there are 5,000 of them, with up to 2,000 being warriors. It is important to recognize that these warriors adhere to a code of ethics characterized by bravery and fearlessness. However, they lack the military tactics employed by organized forces. The U.S. cavalry, consisting of 4 men per horse, faces a challenge. While 3 engage in combat, one must hold the horses, resulting in a loss of personnel during skirmishes. Although their Springfield carbines and ammunition are reliable, the Native Americans possess repeating rifles and prefer their revolvers, allowing for rapid fire. Additionally, they utilize bows and arrows, with the arrows featuring razor-sharp, spoon-shaped heads, leaving the cavalry unaware of the peril they are about to encounter. They are set to advance and investigate the situation. We will now navigate the battlefield to trace the movements of Reno and Custer, as well as the events that transpired. For those interested in visiting this battlefield monument, a comprehensive map is available, detailing the narrative of this site. Having visited before, I can attest to the remarkable nature of this location. The Americans truly excel in managing their national parks. Kudos to you. Custer's 7th Cavalry comprises 600 men, divided into 3 groups, with an additional unit assigned to protect the mule train. Custer plans to approach from behind us, to the north of the Bighorn River. Meanwhile, Reno descends the hills and crosses the Bighorn just below, as the 5,000 Sioux and Cheyenne are encamped on the plains. However, Reno only perceives a fraction of the camp's true size. Instead, Custer divided his command into 3 groups: Major Reno with 148 men, Captain Benteen with 138, and Custer himself leading 255. Additionally, there were Indian scouts comprising 2 officers, 2 interpreters, 5 guides, and 35 enlisted scouts. However, they also had to contend with a large and slow-moving mule train, which was currently stationed in the area. Upon crossing the river, he encounters teepees and takes action. It is crucial to remember the strategy: separate the ponies, remove them from the area, assault the camp, and capture the civilians. This approach would compel the warriors to surrender. However, as Reno initiates his operation, chaos ensues within the camp. While the civilians flee, the warriors remain composed, retrieving their ponies and weapons to launch an attack on Reno. He quickly finds himself needing to establish dismounted skirmish lines, but the number of natives continues to increase, attempting to outflank him. Their tactics are straightforward. They aim to encircle him and breach his lines to overwhelm him. These warriors are loyal to their leaders, such as Crazy Horse, who command formidable groups. At one point, Reno nearly loses his new hat as he is forced to retreat into the trees to avoid being completely overrun. Tragically, one of his scouts is shot in the head, leaving Reno covered in blood and brain matter. This shocking event triggers panic within him, prompting a desperate flight for survival. The cavalrymen must retreat across the river and up a coulee, fleeing for their lives. The path of their escape is marked by the locations of fallen soldiers. Eventually, they regroup and meet Benteen, who has just arrived with the mule train at the battlefield. Meanwhile, Custer is advancing further along what is known as Sharpshooter's Ridge. This location earned its name because during the climax of the conflict, the Sioux held their ground here, directing fire at Reno and Benteen. Custer, approaching from the north of the river, observes both the camp and Reno's charge. He promptly sends messages to Benteen, urging him to support Reno and bring up the mule train along with necessary supplies. This sequence of events unfolded in that critical moment. Custer proceeds onward, as he can only glimpse the rear of the camp. His strategy is to move northward, hoping to encircle and intercept the retreating Sioux in Cheyenne. Unbeknownst to him, up to 2,000 seasoned warriors are lying in wait. This location is Weir Point, where Captain Weir, acting without orders, leads D Company in an attempt to ascertain Colonel Custer's position. Gunfire can be heard in the distance. Weir does not advance any further. He is soon joined by Captain Benteen and his troops, but they are ultimately compelled to retreat as the Sioux and Cheyenne approach. It is at this location that the remaining 7th Cavalry troops come to the grim realization that Custer and his men have perished. Over 200 soldiers are out there, all destined to die. One can only imagine the despair and fear that must have gripped them upon seeing the advancing Sioux and Cheyenne. This area is known as Medicine Tail Coulee. While the exact events remain uncertain, it is believed that Custer divided his forces to position them on higher ground. He remained with C, I, and L companies, moving north along the ridge, while he dispatched E and F companies to scout what is now referred to as Medicine Tail Ford. Much of this information is speculative, as there were no survivors among Custer's advancing troops. The majority of our knowledge comes from the accounts of the native warriors. However, it is confirmed that Custer sent a message to Captain Benteen, urging him to join him promptly. As E and F companies approached the river, they reached a ford visible along the tree line. At this point, Custer's troops could see the full extent of the native camp. Upon crossing the ford, they opened fire on the natives, but the native warriors quickly gathered in greater numbers to defend the ford. They then crossed the river and began to pursue Custer's troops back toward what is known as Battle Ridge. This moment is pivotal in the conflict, as Benteen and his troops, along with Reno, are positioned far behind. This allows the Native American forces to focus their efforts entirely on Custer and his men. Let us proceed further. We are now in Deep Coulee, where Custer's forces are experiencing their first significant confrontation with the enemy. They are attempting to regroup with the remainder of Custer's troops, but Sioux and Cheyenne warriors are crossing the nearby river and encircling them. The warriors aim for the high ground, seeking to surround Custer's retreating soldiers. Picture yourself on horseback. These animals have been on the move for an extended period, and they are fatigued. You are filled with fear, turning to fire at the warriors who swiftly approach, shoot, and then retreat. The situation must have been utterly terrifying. At this moment, the 7th Cavalry is literally racing for their lives. It is remarkable. In my youth, I learned about Custer's last stand, often depicted in famous images. However, there is much more to this story than is commonly understood, with numerous books written on the subject. One of my favorites is Wooden Leg, authored by one of the chiefs who recounted his experiences. It is an excellent read. Now let us continue down the path. We have just ascended Greasy Grass Ridge, where warriors were firing upon the cavalry. At this juncture, the U.S. Cavalry's C Company charged into a large contingent of warriors. They came under intense fire and were forced to retreat to the ridge. Lame White Man, a warrior, led a counterattack against them, resulting in their complete annihilation. Lame White Man fell not far from this location, and you can see the markers surrounding the area. It was indeed a fierce battle. In this coulee, Crazy Horse and White Bull confronted the 7th Cavalry, where groups of men attempted to make a stand, but were ultimately overwhelmed. Their goal was join forces with Custer's command, which was located about half a mile downhill. Just across the road, there is a distinct marker that I would like to show you. These markers commemorate the fallen native warriors. One notable marker is for Matohiton, also known as Bear with Horns, a Mini-Conjo Lakota warrior who fell here on June 25, 1876, while defending the Lakota way of life. If you look back, you can see the vastness of this battlefield, with white markers stretching into the distance. This location is known as Last Stand Hill, marking Custer's final stand. He found himself surrounded with no escape route. A total of 41 men were present. They shot their horses to create makeshift breastworks and took cover behind them. But it was too late. They were overrun and had no chance of survival. This is where Custer met his end. The site has been specially marked, and it is worth noting that his brother was also killed here, with a headstone placed further down. The bodies of civilians and some officers, once identified, were removed from the battlefield. In the aftermath of the battle, the bodies that had been buried where they fell were marked and later relocated to the top of Custer's Hill, where a war memorial lists their names. Just behind it lies a somber reminder, the horse grave, where all the horses were buried together. I would like to take you to one last part of the battlefield. Behind me is Last Stand Hill, the site of Custer's demise. E Company attempted to escape, and you can see two markers here. If you follow the path down, you will witness how these men were relentlessly pursued and met a tragic fate. They are truly ubiquitous. Do you notice the individual in that small depression? Consider these markers. This U.S. soldier who perished here could have originated from Birmingham, my hometown, or from London, Glasgow, Dublin, Stockholm, or any of these locations. They sought a new beginning, yet this is where they found themselves. Observe the route some of them took. They descended into the coulee and ascended the opposite side, while warriors from the Sioux and Cheyenne tribes emerged over the hills, chasing after their comrades. At this point, these men are on foot, filled with sheer terror, fleeing for their lives. This deep ravine marks the location where Custer's forces ultimately met their demise. Custer's last stand is situated on the hill, with his men from E Company positioned all the way down in the valley below. Warriors from both sides are firing down upon them. It must have been a horrific slaughter. If memory serves, over 20 men remain unaccounted for, and it is believed their remains lie buried in that ravine. Perhaps one day archaeologists will excavate the area and uncover their bodies. The narrative of this battle is filled with complexities, but for the Sioux and Cheyenne, it represented a significant victory. Following this event, they would face relentless pursuit, dwindling buffalo populations, and starvation, leading many to return to reservations, with hopes for legislative changes. Sitting Bull would eventually make his way to Canada before returning, while Crazy Horse would surrender, though he proved to be a difficult prisoner and was ultimately stabbed in the back with a bayonet. Yet here at Little Bighorn stands a monument to all who fought on both sides. As you can see, the entire battlefield is scattered with markers indicating where men fell, but it is uncommon to find a U.S. cavalry marker that bears a name. This one belongs to Lieutenant Sturgis, and there is a significant reason for that. As the warriors advanced over the cavalrymen, the women and elderly individuals who accompanied them began to attend to the fallen and injured. Armed with clubs and sharp knives, they would strike the wounded fatally, subsequently mutilating the bodies through dismemberment and decapitation. This practice stemmed from their belief that such actions would prevent the deceased from recognizing them and following them in the afterlife, reflecting a spiritual conviction rather than mere cruelty. Many of the cavalrymen, after being hastily buried in shallow graves where they fell, began to decompose, making it uncommon to identify them later. Among the warriors who perished in this battle, estimated to be between 100 and 160, many were retrieved by their families, leaving only a few markers indicating where they had fallen. In contrast, there are over 200 markers for the U.S. cavalry, highlighting the potential missteps that led to this tragedy. Questions arise regarding Custer's decisions. Should he have divided his forces? Should he have proceeded with more caution? Should other officers have come to his aid? Should the generals have refrained from splitting their troops? These are questions for you to ponder. The battlefield is expansive and awe-inspiring, and it is commendable how the area has been preserved for future generations to explore and understand the events that transpired on Custer's Hill. Before concluding the tour, I must direct your attention to the Indian Memorial, which honors the courageous warriors who fought and those who lost their lives here. It serves as a poignant symbol of remembrance for the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors who valiantly defended their beliefs, values, and way of life. Reading the polished granite walls is a deeply moving experience. The inscriptions feature quotes from various chiefs and warriors, narrating tales of courage, sacrifice, and resilience. I am particularly fond of the bronze sculpture present here, which depicts three warriors charging into battle, accompanied by a woman who is handing a shield to one of them. It is truly a beautiful piece. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.